everybody. This is S. Anthony Thomas. This is the S. Anthony Thomas Show, and my guest this time is someone I've actually wanted to have on the show for quite a while. His name is Eddie Brill. I refer to him as a comedy legend for a reason. Basically, the guy's done everything. I mean, he's been on television, I think, 17 decillion times. He's played comedy concerts around the world. I mean, Australia, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, France, Holland, Hong Kong. Yes, I said Hong Kong. He actually was the audience warm-up for Late Show with David Letterman, but he was also the stand-up comedy talent coordinator for Late Show with David Letterman. Basically, this man has done it all. There's a reason I called him a legend in comedy, and you will find out why in this episode. I've been wanting to have this guy on the show for a long time. This episode absolutely rules. You will love it. Trust me. I know because I was there. So as always, much love to you. And are you ready for the show? Of course you are. Let's do it. Well, hello, Mr. Brill.
Hello there.
How are you doing?
I'm well. I just came from another show that it wasn't stand up, but it was really cool. And what do I call you, Anthony or S. Anthony? I've never called you.
Well, my friends call me S. Anthony.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to be your friend, so.
Yes, and well, by the time we're done with this, we're probably going to go out for coffee, even though we're probably in different states right now.
Yeah, we are so far. We'll see what happens. Maybe I'll walk toward you and you walk toward me, and by the time this is over, we'll be in the same place.
It's about 100 miles, so.
Yeah. All right. I'll walk quick. I'll move fast. Where are you right now?
It might take. Well, right now I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Oh wow, yeah. I was just watching.
Yeah, I'm visiting family.
I recorded the Mets and the Phillies, and I don't want to. I have recorded. So in a sense, my TV is in Philadelphia right now. The game, but I'm recording it, and I'll watch it after this recording.
This is a very interesting thing because, warring teams. It's like I grew up hating all the teams that you love.
Right. Yeah, especially because they've always beaten us. They've always done really well against us. Especially I'm a hockey fan, so the Broad Street Bullies were just wiped the floor with us, and throughout the years, the Mets have only really won 2 World Series in their history, where, the Phillies have been, I'm a Mets fan. So I actually was, oddly enough, I didn't even think about it till now. I was at the Yankees played the Phillies the first year of the new Yankee Stadium. And I happened to be at Game 6. And I was with a Philly fan. I didn't care, either way, because I'm a Mets fan. But I was with a friend of mine who wore her Phillies gear, and we had a sort of run for our lives, at one point.
That actually sounds because the thing is New York and Philadelphia basically are very similar in many, many ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is you cannot wear the enemy uniform.
Right. Oh, yeah.
In the other stadium, even though baseball is not exactly as aggressive as if you were to go to a hockey stadium or a football stadium, where you basically should just beat yourself up and stay home and save yourself some money.
Right. And you know where to hide the bruises, as opposed to. But it's interesting because I'm not a Giants fan, so we don't really play the Eagles that much. Although the Giants are in the same division as the Eagles, so that would probably be a bigger rivalry. And here's an interesting thing: I love Philadelphia. I get a good feeling. There are certain cities, as a performer, comedian, someone who knows the world in a sort of rhythmic, feel the rhythm of a room sense. There's a good energy in Philadelphia, and I've been there a lot. I've gone to see concerts there because it's not a long travel. You can take the Amtrak and get there in an hour sometimes, I think, or an hour and a half. And I've seen a lot of great concerts there. I've stayed overnight. I've eaten there. I've gone to when I go to DC, I just get a sick feeling in my stomach. But in Philly,
Well, there's many reasons for that.
yeah, exactly. It really is, and for every reason possible, I don't love DC except for I used to love the DC Improv, which was great.
Well, it's a great club.
There was a great club, but Philadelphia has always been. I've always had an incredibly great time and had a good feeling and a million great friends in that city. And we used to joke around and call it the city of lovely brothers.
Well, apparently you've seen my avatar. Well, thank you, man. I really appreciate that.
You are a lovely,
wonderful.
Yeah. But now, I've always been.
It's really weird because.
Go ahead, your turn.
Oh no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you do like an Arsenio thing where I was gonna compliment you, and then right after you complimented me, kind of thing. But I do, we don't know each other well, but I've always respected you, and I've always thought you were great. So when you asked me to do this, I was thrilled because this was the first time we'd really actually get to have a long chat.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I wanted to do this for a while. I started doing comedy obviously here. I don't live here, but I'm here now. I live in New Jersey. I've been since 1986, and there were always people I always enjoyed watching because I liked the artistry of it. I mean, one of the things I always enjoyed about stand-up comedy is to watch someone who I consider, like a sculptor. Someone who really understands wordplay, timing, pacing. I loved Carol Leifer, Paul Provenza. People like that. There was this guy I like called Eddie Brill. I don't know if you've heard of him.
And weirdly enough, I get his mail. They keep delivering his mail to my apartment, and I open it. I have to admit, I open it. But no, Provenza.
That's illegal, sir.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You don't know the kind of mail I get, but Leifer and Provenza are two of my favorites. And they've always been two of my favorites, but Provenza once had a bit about the dictionary that I thought was one of the classic bits of all time. And it really was right up my alley for the kind of material I did. And I begged him, this was way early on in the mid to late 80s, like when you were starting as well. And I said, Paul, that bit is so, he says, look, you have a bit about the Yellow Pages that I lose sleep overnight that I didn't come up with it. I'll trade you. And I went, nah, you keep the dictionary and I'll keep the Yellow Pages. And it was, but yeah, I really respect that kind of craft that Leifer and Provenza, do.
It was an interesting thing because I know that we always appreciate what another person does. When we see someone performing the art form at a high level, you just sit there as another practitioner. You look at it and you appreciate it, as a fan and also as an artist in the same genre. But I want to ask you this because you got a couple of years on me in the stand-up game. Was there any? I mean, you just talked about what Provenza did. Did you ever have a comic? Or I'm talking about early on, right after you started, where you watched them and they literally made you question your existence?
Yes. I remember the moment very clearly. I had started in the late 70s in college. I was in an improv group and a sketch group, and we were very wildly successful at a time when Saturday Night Live just started, and we were doing really well for ourselves, and we worked really hard, and it showed. It paid off. It showed. And some of our friends we went to school with were doing stand-up, and we kind of joined them. And I did that for a while, and then I quit after college. And then in 1984, I started again. I ran this comedy club where I was earlier tonight. It was called The Paper Moon. I started comedy there at this venue. And it eventually, I couldn't run it anymore because I was traveling the world, and so I gave it to Barry Katz, who ended up calling it the Boston Comedy Club. So I started the venue 4 years before it became the Boston Comedy Club, and it was called the Paper Moon. So I was doing it, and I was booking the shows, and it was amazing. If you look at the lists that I found, some lists of some of the bookings, it's incredible the people we had in their infancy. And I remember one night I had Tony V from Boston on, and he brought his friend and our mutual friend Bobcat Goldthwait in. And so, of course, he did a set on the show. And I said to myself, I think that I should think about a different career. I really said, look, I'm pretty good at this and I'm enjoying it, but I'll never be that good. And why should I stay in this? And I was ready to quit again. Honestly, he was so smart and so brilliant and so provocative that I said, this is what comedy's about. And I was ready to pack it in. And luckily I didn't. How about yourself? Is there someone or a moment like that for you?
You're not gonna believe me. There are two people. You're not gonna believe this. You're absolutely not
Bobcat
gonna believe
Goldthwait is
this.
one of them.
Wait, he walked into a comedy club where I just walked off stage. He was doing the Tower Theater, and he walked in, and I killed. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. Bobcat, and we have Tom Kenny comes in with him.
Right, Tomcat.
Well, Tom Kenny goes up and eviscerates the place.
Right.
Then he brings Bobcat Goldthwait up. Now, remember, this is 80s Bobcat Goldthwait, okay?
Right.
With the hair and the clothes. So,
and the
so they, I was like, oh man, and this is the height of the when he just became Bobcat. So they go, and I'm gonna bring up my friend Bobcat Goldthwait, and the audience is like, yeah, sure, yeah. you get, this is a Philadelphia audience. They're going, yeah, look, buddy, yeah, right. There's no way in the world Bobcat go. He turned around. I told you, and he goes on the stage and smashes this place. And I'm sitting in the back going, I'm a good salesperson.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I had the same exact moment. That those guys.
And the other one was Emo Phillips.
And Emo Phillips, yeah, one of the smartest and most generous people in show business, in comedy. He was just so giving and so caring and so smart. And and still is. I still keep in touch with him, and he's just an amazing guy. I saw him last year. I hadn't seen him. There was at the Boston Comedy Festival after thing that he was there, and just a good guy. It was really, really nice to see. We were talking about Tom Kenny. They're all from upstate New York, Syracuse area, and Tom. Kenny and Bob Goldthwait were, best friends, and they went up to audition for Barry Crimmins. And Barry was running a club, and they were kids. They were young. They were teenagers. And Barry's like, "What are you doing here?" And they go, "We're the guys you called." And he put them on, and he loved them. And the three of them got the nicknames. Barry Crimmins was Bearcat, Tom Kenny was Tomcat, and Bobby Goldthwait was Bobcat. And that's how they got their names.
Oh,
and then, yeah. And then Barry Crimmins was going to move to New York City to do comedy, but he ended up getting a ride, like hitching and getting a ride. And the guy stopped in Boston, and Barry ended up just decided to move to Boston because he saw it as a sign. And then he invited Bobcat and Tomcat to come to Boston to do some sets. And then they eventually moved there. And it was a great scene in that era. And I was lucky enough to be able to perform with those guys in their infancy.
Now, in your travels, now obviously you've been everywhere. In your travels, and I'll talk about. Yeah, you've been around the world in I.
I'm not far off. I've been more yay than anything,
And, I'm curious because I see you're a New York guy. I'm a Philly guy, and when I moved to Los Angeles, the only time I didn't feel any culture shock when I went to New York, except for the fact that I was 17 and it was huge to me.
Yeah.
It was right. New York. But when I went to Los Angeles, it was a different type of culture shock because now I had been a professional, and you know how it is when you get to the point where you're actually paying your light and car bills with jokes.
Yeah.
It's you're not going to really. I mean, we both done bars and strip clubs, correct? And so when you think about comedy in New York, because you were established there, you were established in Boston and New York, then you went to Los Angeles. I'm assuming you had to have been in the mid 80s.
I went there in 1986 to do Star Search. And And
Star Search.
right. And I vowed to at least go to the comedy clubs and try to pass. And I passed at both of them, the Improv and the Comedy Store. But the Improv told me that I had to move there, and the Comedy Store said to me, which was the following night, said you can work here anytime you come to LA. So I went with the Comedy Store, and I started stand up again in '84. So here I'm in '86 out there. And then Sam Kinison, who I was so blessed to have as a mentor, because he was such a brilliant comic and treated me and a bunch of us really, really well, like brothers. And, he convinced me to move out there and there was a lot of work to be had. Mitzi Shore put me in the apartment building behind with her daughter and another friend of ours, Tom. We split this house, and I lived literally behind the Comedy Store. So the Comedy Store was my living room. And every night, I was there every night that I wasn't on the road, every night. And I would sometimes get 3 spots a night in every one of the rooms. And one night, the story you told earlier about Goldthwait was one of the greatest nights of my life. I was on stage having a decent set, and they handed me a note, when you're done, bring up Richard Pryor. And I thought I couldn't breathe for a second. I couldn't breathe. And then I said, okay, finish this joke, finished it, got a laugh, said, ladies and gentlemen, this next guy, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a great comic. Put your hands together for Richard Pryor. And the audience like, yeah, right. You could just, the same story of the Philadelphia thing. And as he made his way through the crowd, you heard like cheering, and then they went nuts. And I handed him the mic, shook his hand. He said, nice job, kid, which he could have said, sugar frosted flakes. It didn't matter to me. It was Richard Pryor. And I got to stand in the back of the room and watch the master go to work.
The funny, it's really weird. It's really weird. We have I remember seeing, somebody called me and goes, when I was living in there in the 90s, they go, Richard's on stage. And I went, I don't need to be on the phone with you right now. And I hung up the phone. I ran down the steps. I parked by the pink dot illegally down the street. Yeah. And I go in the store and said, Richard, I want to see Richard. Can I leave my car here? He goes, oh, I wish I could go. You can't go. Can I leave my car? Yes. I said, I promise you I'll buy $20 worth of stuff when I come back. If you leave, I can leave my car here. He goes, okay. I run back. I watch Richard. This is near the end. He's in the wheelchair.
Yeah.
He was still better than like 98% of the people in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. He was incredible.
And he comes down. Oh God. He comes down and I'm looking at him and it's like if Mount Rushmore just jumped off and started walking towards you, and I'm going, oh my! I almost wanted to go. Would it be okay if I just wave my hands and like so some of the air circulating around you, I could like breathe it in? Would that be all right?
Oh my God! Yeah,
because
that's what I felt.
Because it's just weird when you see these people.
I couldn't believe it. But that was the beauty of we're talking about the late 86 through 90s when I lived there pretty much half the time. I kept my apartment in New York and split it with 2 comics, and I ended up staying behind the Comedy Store and then living in Robert Schimmel's old apartment, which was near Fairfax High School. So I was every night watching the greatest comics in the world, and there was Roseanne and Paul Mooney and Louis Anderson, and I mean it was just Jim Carrey and famous people and non-famous people who were just the best at what they did. Taylor Negron. That's how I first saw Robert Schimmel, and of course, every night the show would end with Sam Kinison, and he was always inventive and did new things, and I got to work every night, and and that stage time really was, valuable, and we partied like crazy, but I never partied before the shows. I dedicated, because I loved the comedy so much, I dedicated myself to the stand-up, and then partied like a maniac afterwards.
I absolutely love Sam Kinison.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, it's like, because I started the year the first album came out. And so I literally watched him on Saturday Night Live, and the next day I went down and bought his first album.
Yeah.
I said, I don't know what I just saw, but whatever it is, it's worth $12 to me because I'm going to go buy this album.
Yeah. Well, that shows
And
that I'm much older than you, because my first album, I think, was $1, and it was Carlin after I saw him on the Tonight Show. You know.
that's a he. See, when I spoke of Mount Rushmore, when I spoke of Richard Pryor Mount Rushmore, my route Mount Rushmore has three people on it. It's the holy trinity of comedy.
Mm-hmm.
These are like gods to me, and I love them, and I literally have everything they all released: Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Bill Cosby.
Yeah. There you go. Those are three
Of course,
great ones.
I have all of Sam stuff too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
there
just
for
really weird.
me,
No,
Jonathan Winters, and Lily Tomlin, and there's for me, it's hard to pick four. It really is. I mean, and then you go to people like Chris Rock or Norm Macdonald, or
mm-hmm.
I mean, there's and Joan Rivers, who should be on Mount Rushmore, who also helped me with
Oh,
my very first Letterman set. She was, that she actually, I met her once with a bunch of comics, and then years later I ran into her at the airport in Milwaukee. She was coming from working the Milwaukee Grand Palace, and I was working the local comedy club, and we were both heading home to New York, and I sat with her for a little bit and told her I was going to be doing Letterman soon, and she switched seats with the person next to me on the plane and asked me to go and went over my set with me. And she says, all right, let me hear it. I go, what? She goes, the set. Let me hear the set that you're going to do on Letterman. And she gave me such great advice, and she helped me crush. And I've always loved her for that alone, But so she's on my Mount Rushmore. There's so many, Robert Klein,
oh, geez, he's
yeah,
another one. I have all of his stuff.
yeah,
It's really weird because as far as I didn't get to meet Miss Rivers, but I did get her book Enter Talking.
yes.
Chapter 10. How does a comedian, when you talk about a comedian gelling? I read that chapter, I think 17 billion and 6 times.
That's great. Who and
because
who I think
it's just
yeah, and who I think is the greatest comic that is out now, and there's nobody in second place, and people don't know this name that well. Paula Poundstone is the best live comic I've ever seen. And I sat with a couple of other comedians who were really world famous, I would just be doing more name dropping by mentioning them. We all agreed that she's the best comic we've ever seen live. I mean, only Cosby, I saw him live at Radio City Music Hall, and I laughed for 2 hours and 15 minutes without stopping. But Paula Poundstone is one of the most ingenious comedians I've ever seen live. She's just spectacular.
Well, you're not going to get any arguments from me.
Yeah,
because I've seen it. Because the thing is, those three, I've mentioned those three because those were the three that, first of all, obviously they're high level of artistry, but those are the first three that were kind of the soil, that made me go, I've got to do this. And then obviously you run into the Louis Andersons and the George Wallaces,
yeah,
and people like, and you start to love those guys. Now I brought up L.A. because I wanted to ask you about this because when you think in terms of stand-up comedy, New York versus Los Angeles, it seems, I mean, obviously the culture is different because they're on different coasts, but do you think one is more conducive to the art form of stand-up comedy than the other one?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to be a judge only because I'm a New Yorker. I lived part of my life in Florida and part of my life in Boston for college. I went to junior high school and high school in South Florida, but I think that there's no more artistic place in the country than New York City. And there are other cities that are artistic, like Philly and like Austin, Texas, and like Chicago, Seattle, Denver, and there's some incredible cities in America, and those Minneapolis, and it's only because of the people who are running the scenes in these cities, So that's why I love those. But New York is definitely, see, to me, LA is a color photo, and New York is a black and white photo. And New York is has this, sort of soul to it where it's, this is where you come to, a lot of the casting people used to say, we get our actors from New York and we bring them to LA. because that's where all the cameras were in LA. And that's where show business is. But New York is where Nina Simone in my heart lives. You know what I mean? The soulful artist comes from New York, and because of the no bullshit sort of atmosphere that you get in New York. But I'm a bad person to answer this, because I'm a New Yorker who loves New York so much. And I mean, maybe if I grew up in Chicago or LA, I would say differently. I've had friends in LA argue with me that LA is the better place. But to me, it's New York. It's always been New York. It has in the past, and it's going to end. It's going to continue to be New York, even after this pandemic blows away, even if it takes a year or so, whatever.
Well, as an objective person from Philadelphia, okay, I've lived in New York during the 80s. There's a friend of mine had an apartment, was never there, gave me the keys and said, have at it, kid, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
Got a great apartment for no money.
Outstanding.
and for most of the 80s. And I lived in Los Angeles. I think that when you go to New York, everybody that I've known and my friends that are in New York now, essentially they love the art form itself so much that essentially it's almost all about how can I get better at this?
Yeah.
I just have to get better at this. When I lived in Los Angeles, the people that were all about the craft itself, and no shade to my Los Angeles friends, and I want to say that because there's quite a few people who listen to this podcast in Los Angeles, and I want to let you know that don't take this personally, because I don't want to get beaten up by hundreds of people.
Yeah.
Probably there's probably like 3,000 people in Los Angeles going, you
don't want to get taken out of a truck and beaten up by a bunch of your peers.
I'll show up and there'll be like 5,000 people going, yeah, we were listening to your smart mouth punk, and now that you're back.
Yeah, so I don't regret any of my time in LA. In fact, David Letterman went to LA because he knew that's where you had to be at the Comedy Store in order to get on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That's why people went to LA, because it's not But if you're a pure stand-up, New York is the motherland.
Because everybody that I know, essentially, when I went out there, I know this is going to sound stupid. I'm going to admit it in front of okay. I went to Los Angeles because I wanted to get a sitcom just like everybody else. I wanted to get a sitcom because I wanted people to know who I was. I wanted people to know who I was, so when the sitcom was over, I could stand in front of people with a microphone and be a town-to-town joke salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
I love doing the other stuff, but comedy is like everything else would be like a good friend. Comedy is the wife that I'm happily married to.
Yeah. David Brenner from Philadelphia kind of told me that almost those same words. He said you got to marry it and love it and cherish it and nurture it, and that's what comedy is to him. And you know what's another interesting thing? One of the biggest changes in my life that made me a better comedian or a better performer and understood the craft better, and then all of the little subtleties, was working in Europe. Because in London and in Dublin, or even in Galway, Ireland, like England and Ireland, the comedy scenes there are incredible. The comedy out of England has always been top-notch, brilliant comedy, from Monty Python, and I can give you 1,000 names. But the crowds are different, because the crowds don't like pandering. And in America, I learned this from working in Europe, is that American comics pander all the time because they don't have enough confidence in their material to get laughs. So they create laughter and more applause, by going, give yourselves a round of applause for coming out tonight, or let's hear it for the troops, or, there's none of that works in England. They like, get off the stage. If you're we want you to write material and make us laugh with your original stuff. We're not here we've gone out before. We don't need to applaud for coming out tonight. We don't need to make your job easier because you don't have the material to pull it off. And that made me a better comedian. And because my first line in London, the first time I ever went on stage, I said, "It's great to be here in London." And without a pause, some guy yelled, "Bullshit." And I was like, and luckily I had a comeback, and I was something like, "You're right. It's a shithole and smells like urine." And then the crowd cheered because I was able to come back immediately. And then they rode me on their shoulders all the way out for my audition set for the Comedy Store in London. But it was such an American thing to do, and sort of a bullshitty thing that we do in America is pandering to the crowd, wanting their approval, as opposed to just being, doing what we loved, and hopefully the audience will join in. And that made me a better comic. And then,
what is the no you do when you do those? I was going to ask you about that next, actually, because I was curious about that, because I see that it's now a world. We literally, comics can do world tours now.
Yeah.
We can play all of these places. So you said, and what about Ireland?
Oh, that's a country of storytellers.
Australia.
And there's a little club in Ireland. I mean, I've done some big venues, like, the Vicar Street Theater is 1,000 people, and it was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
It was ridiculous, but there's a little bar upstairs called Upstairs at the International Bar. And it's a room that's tiny, with a little tiny puppet theater looking stage with no microphone. They seat 50 people comfortably, and they squeeze 100 people in the room. And they put people on the floor of the stage, and you just go up there and have a chat with the audience. And it is one of the greatest comedy clubs on the planet. There used to be one in Paris that was at the Hotel du Nord. And it unfortunately is no longer there. But they did stand up once a month, and they used an English-speaking comic, say Australian, Brit, Irish, or American. Me, a couple of other, Rich Hall, Tom Rhodes. A few of us were the Americans who would go over there and work. And it was a bunch of expats, Brits, Irish, Australians, Americans, who were over there and starving for English comedy. And once a month they do it, and they would pack the joint, and you would go, you had to do an hour and a half on your own. And I was doing 2 hours every night. I didn't have 2 hours. You know what I mean? It was, so I became a better comic because I was forced to work in other cultures. Now, that's the other thing. When you write material for other cultures, you write human jokes that have to do with that every human being can. Like, if I wrote a joke about talking in my sleep, then everyone, it doesn't matter which country you're in, you'll get it. But if I write a joke about, so I'm in Times Square, some people would get it, but it'd be too local. Or how about that, TV show that we have that you don't get in your country, or you do a joke like that. You're forced to write material from a human perspective. And also, the people who speak English, I did a lot of wordplay, or do a lot of wordplay, and they appreciated that because that's the kind of style and kind of fun that they have. So I luckily fit in well.
It's really cool when you go different places and you have a myriad of experiences. And sometimes you notice and sometimes you don't, where every time you have a different experience, you go to a different city or different type, different country, different types of audiences. They always, it's like something alters your comedic DNA, right?
Yeah.
And you become a little bit better, and it's almost imperceptible. And then you notice all of a sudden, you're like Iron Man. You have these extra skills, and you go, "Where the hell did this missile launcher come from?"
Right? Yeah, you're right.
Like, I didn't have this missile launcher elbow yesterday.
That's right. Extra skills. That's a great way to put it. Brenner told me, he yelled at me once because I was at Caroline's for the 12:30 show, and he had done the 8 and the 10. And I said, he let me open for him, and he doesn't really have people open for him. I did like 5 minutes at the beginning just to get the crowd going. So I'm doing the late show, and he said, I said, "Damn it, there's only gonna be 15 people in this 300 seat room." And he yelled at me. He says, "Those 15 people paid to babysitters and drove their car in, and you give them the greatest show you've ever given in your life." He said, "Some of my best shows were for just a handful of people in the audience." And he yelled at me, and he was right. And I had one of the best shows of my life. for those 15 people, because he inspired me to take it to the next level. And so you learn from watching, the best, like, with Chappelle, for instance. Chappelle is one of the greatest comics ever, and he, and there's room for him on the greatest comics of up in South Dakota. But what he did is he came out and he told his truth, and he never stopped doing that. And I think he's like one of, like, a handful of people who did that and just came out and told the truth. And he didn't try to please people. He did what made him laugh. And he laughed all the way through it. And when people say, well, I don't like what he's doing, I'll go, well, he's not here to please you. Go watch somebody else. And that's sort of the way
it's so weird.
Yeah, that's the way I've learned to be as a comedian. I'm not here to please the audience. If I please them, that's fantastic. But it's like if you go on a date with someone, I remember what that was like. You go on a date with someone and you're all you're doing is trying to please the other person. They're like, look, this person doesn't have their own backbone or their own strength or their own resolve. So, that's the way you live life. You just be the best possible you and respect the audience and hold them in high regard. Like I remember the first time I went to Alabama, I did a gig in Birmingham. And, of course, all the cliches, the South and blah, 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 and it was one of the greatest gigs, the best audiences I've ever worked in my life, because, again, Brenner taught me to respect everyone and give them the benefit of the doubt and play to the highest, play up. Almost like what Nelson Mandela once said. He said, don't, this is paraphrasing. He had said, it's, when you're up top, stay up top and be that light. Don't come down and try to, bring your sort of light down, because that's condescending to the people you're bringing it down to. Those weren't his words, but that's what he meant.
Yeah. I just, it's really weird, because that's the first time I felt like an old guy, because what Brenner did to you, I did to some kid comics that were coming to. I was this is back when I was running a room, and the audience was late, and there was 12 people there, and I didn't drive down there for this, and I almost gave him the Paulie to Rocky. Listen, punk,
Right.
These 15 people, punk,
Right.
And it was like when you hear your father's voice. I heard all the older comics' voices to me. Listen, punk, you shut up and you get on that stage for those two people.
Yeah.
And I never forgot it. If we were doing a video podcast, when you were telling that story about what Brenner was yelling at you, you would see me smiling and nodding my head.
Right.
Because I'm going, yeah, I had that vicious beating myself a long time ago.
And I was glad, I was glad that, these people are very honest with me, and because they care about it so much and love the art form and love their job. And Brenner appreciated me, he was very good to me. I found out all these great stories. Like some of my heroes had said really nice things about me behind my back, which was, it's of course, as you can imagine, whatever job you have, if someone you respect talks highly of you, you're walking, 10 feet above the ground. So I had heard all these great things from Brenner, and I trusted him because I saw how hard he worked, and he worked every day, and he made more appearances as a stand-up on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson than anybody else who did stand-up. David Steinberg, I think, and Bob Hope had the most performances ever as, hosts and guests and all that other kind of stuff. But I think Brenner had the most. I think he had like 114 or 136 sets. And, think how many times 6 or 5 minutes that is. It's, 75 hours of, I don't know, my math isn't as it used to be, as good as it used to be, but that's a lot of material. And these guys wrote every day. And even during the pandemic, I've been trying to write something funny, something creative every day, because, it was beat into my head by these incredible craftsmen throughout my life.
Now, what I want to find out from you, this is something that I've always wanted to know too, because I've always, when I meet comics that I enjoy, that would include you, good sir.
That's very lovely.
The
city of lovely brothers.
Yeah, because you remember I told you, because these are people that that there were people. There's a handful of people I've had on the podcast that when I refer to them as legend, and I called you that as well, is because the comics that knew you were coming on, and obviously I've been around for a while. I look up to people and I enjoy their craft work. When I watched Letterman and I watched the comics that came on, this is when I did not know you were booking the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to watch the comics that came on, and I noticed I always thought there are different types of applause breaks. There's the applause break that comes from the momentum of a series of bits that are piled on top of each other, and there's a
Yes.
crescendo, there's momentum, and then right.
Yes, I know that
And,
one
and,
well.
and
Yeah.
oh yes, and I remember I was watching Letterman, and I started noticing that there was a lot of the second type as well, which was they love the jokes, but there's a different type of applause for we've been carried to the crescendo, and then there's the applause that comes after the joke because not only did they find it funny, they were impressed because they could see the craft, they could
Yes.
see the sculpting, they appreciated it. And I'm going, who the hell is booking these comics? Because I said, I guarantee you, who's ever booking these comics, not only are they a comedian, I bet they're a damn good one.
Yeah. Well, Letterman was,
And that's my
a comedian,
book.
so he loved the craft, and he loved the craftsmen and craftswomen that did performed, and it was a small group of people that fit
Mhm.
into that sort of realm. There were some incredible comedians that I wanted to book, but that I couldn't because they didn't fit the show. You have to do, it's your job is it's not the Eddie Brill show. So I was booking the David Letterman show, and he loved like a guy like Jim Gaffigan, who's it's a
Mhm.
perfect example of someone. The person he had the most ever was Jake Johansson, and just those two names alone, they're just two of the greatest craftsmen in comedy writing, and he appreciated that, in his own show. It's the combination of smart and silly that I like, that
Mhm.
he liked. That's why I like British comedy so much. That smart and silly that Brian Regan brings to the table, or Wendy Liebman brings to the table. That
Mhm.
those kind of comics were the ones that he liked the most. And there were comics who they would have like one weird goofy joke, and I would almost book them because I wanted Letterman to hear that joke, because I knew he would like them. I remember Karen Rontowski had this one joke, and she wears the Santa Claus underwear because every time she's in a good mood or bad mood, it's always Christmas in her pants or something like that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just knew that Letterman was going to laugh, and he did, and he couldn't stop telling that joke every week or two. He'd say, "As Christmas in my pants." I remember Tommy Johnigan had one joke that he would repeat over and over again. Hugh Fink had this Bobby, this third base coach bit where he go, "Come on, Bobby, come on, Bobby." And Letterman would just say that all the time because he just loved the silliness of that. "Come on, Bobby." And Harry Hill, the comedian from England, he would say, "Look at
Mhm.
this is the best material I had," and he would open the lining of his coat. And Letterman would do
Yeah.
that all the time. He did that all the time. He did it because he paid homage to the great craftsmen and women of comedy.
Now that had to have been pretty difficult to do that job because I mean, even if you're just hosting a show at maybe the Boston Comedy Club or something like that, and you have the list in your hand and there's 25 names on it, people are going to follow you to the bathroom to find out when they're on next, right? Right.
Yeah,
I know
but
there's some personal experience.
but here's the thing. I'm a comic, so I understand that, and I made
Hmm.
sure that I was the booker that I would want if I was auditioning for a show. Because I remember
Hmm.
in the days I would audition or be in a room, and the comedy booker from the big show would come in, and he or she would hide out in the bar, and you do your set, and then they'd leave, and then you never knew what would happen. What I did was I'd come there early. I talked to all the comics who were doing the thing and asked if there's any questions. Please feel free to ask. And most people were afraid, or not, maybe not afraid, but they didn't expect that. And so they didn't know what to ask. And, I always gave my email address and said, hey, if anyone has any questions to the bookers of the clubs, have them call me in advance and we can go over stuff or whatever, because I'm a comic and I know how important it is. And I know how thrilling it was for me to do my first Letterman or my first TV or whatever. And then I'd take extensive notes throughout the whole audition. And then afterwards, I would stay to the end. And to any comic who wanted to hear the notes, I would give it to them. Now, that was a mistake in a way because that's what I wanted, but that's not what other people wanted. That was one of the hard parts, is because, like, as a comic, I had auditioned for Letterman a few times and didn't get it, and I didn't understand why. And I really wanted to know why, because I got big laughs and, this and that. And one time, one of the bookers fell off the chair laughing at one joke I had done, and I said, "Oh, I got the show," and then I didn't get the show. So I did that. But, the comics, they really just wanted me to go, you got the show. They didn't want to hear, well, this joke doesn't really fit the kind of set that we would do, or, and I thought that would be helpful. It turned out to be like, you can't be perfect to everyone. But I thought, if I'm going to offer that, you're welcome to come and listen. And many, many, many comics who came and took the notes and took them seriously came, and I told them all, I said, there's no rules, just be the best, funniest you can be. And if, and have the attitude like, fuck Eddie Brill. And if he doesn't like what I do, somebody else will. And when I saw that attitude kind of thing, then I knew that the comedian really cared and was, had a strength and a resolve that, that made them interesting. I saw comedians that weren't ready yet, but I knew that they were going to be great because I saw they had that something, that soulfulness, that below the surface, power that came out. And, I've always, for some reason, I've always had that, when I booked the comedy club in the city, I booked a lot of people before they were famous, and then I ran the comedy festival for Nebraska for Johnny Carson. And 90% of the people that I booked over all those 10 years that I did the thing, 90% of them have gone on to major careers. And so I'm pretty proud and confident in that kind of thing. I've always been able to feel the rhythm of the room and I'm not right 100% of the time ever. I could never be right. And thankfully, you can learn from that. But I really decided to be the booker I wanted to be. And then, and that's all I could do. And that's what I did. So it wasn't easy, but I was always there for the comedians because I was a comic and I knew what it was like. And I respected every single person who auditioned, except if they stole material.
Yeah, because it's in your position, it just sounds like somebody it was like a Pro Bowl player who then became a coach. And now you're coaching people who played the position you used to play, even though technically you were still playing.
But at the same time, I was still playing. Like I was Pete Rose without the betting.
Exactly.
I was the like Stan Musial. I was the player coach for old people, and I was still playing. Now I did Letterman 10 times, but the first 6 or so I wasn't the booker. But, I went like 7-8 years without doing the show, even though I would have loved to have done it every year. But because I wanted to do the show, but, I had to, there was so many comics auditioning and so few spots open. And then one year Letterman said, you haven't done the show in a while. I go, yeah, because I'm putting these other people on. And he said, do the fucking show. He's like, I want you to do stand-up on it. And so when I did the show, I always wrote a brand new set for the show, brand new every time, and I wanted to knock it out of the park because if I'm going to book it, these comics are going to watch me and go, yeah, he's booking it, and look how he sucks. You know what I mean? I wanted it to be like, all right, he did. He's a pro, and he's, I'm glad he's doing the booking.
Yeah, no pressure, Eddie. No pressure. It's the entire industry staring at you. No big deal.
Yeah, exactly. And I had to get out of my head about that. I had to get out of my head because if I continued to be in that head, I would get in my way. And, so I didn't. I just wrote as best as I could. Had a couple of people that I went to help critique me. Of course, I had to get everything approved by the producers of the show and the standards and practices and all that. But it was a thrill. That was the best. The Ed Sullivan Theater is the best stage I've ever been on in my life.
How many people are in there? Was it 400 or 500 seats?
492. 492.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a gigantic comedy club.
Yeah. And always full.
Yeah.
Always full and always raucous and not always smart crowds, not always great crowds, but a lot of times people are on vacation and drunk, or people on vacation and they were tired from walking the city all day. And sometimes they weren't great, but it was kind of my job at the show is to warm them up, bring them up to a certain level. And sometimes Letterman would go, this crowd is not that smart. And I would go, I can't. And he'd yell at me and I'd say, I can't make them smart. I could get them energized, but I can't make them smart. And yeah. And
that's really weird because I was going to ask you because you did the warm up too.
Yeah. That I did for 17 years. And I did a million other things. I did I think 6 or 8 times, I got to do the opening because Alan Coulter wasn't there. From New York, the greatest city in the world. That was one of the biggest thrills for me. I produced segments. Did a couple of skits. Letterman would send me out to the audience to bring somebody a thing, and I would get paid for that because you get paid if you're on camera. And, I was at his desk at every commercial break, either just talking about life or sports or the Beatles or, coming up with an idea for the next segment or whatever. So I had an incredible time there. 17 years in one of the greatest theaters in the history of, show business, with one of the greatest broadcasters in the history of show business. And also, everyone who worked there was the best at what they did. Like the main cameraman, Dave Dorsett, he was Walter Cronkite's cameraman. It was like the best lighting people, the best producers, the writers came from Harvard. It was like all these, the best, sound guy, the best, whatever. He surrounded himself with only the best, and it forced you to take your game to the next level, which was really fun to play on that kind of level.
You were on the broadcast dream team.
Yeah. I'm very proud. Proud of those 17 years. Yeah.
As you should be honest with you. I mean, Jesus. I mean, heck, one of those years is enough to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
One day.
Now I'm gonna ask you. Now, what was the first big? Was Letterman the first big late night program that you did as a stand-up comedian?
Yeah, I did Star Search in '86, and I didn't do Letterman until '97. I did British TV shows. I did really big British shows, and I did Australian television. I've done like comedy in a bunch of different countries. I've done in Amsterdam and in Paris and in Bangladesh and Hong Kong and all these different crazy places. But I did TV and a lot of I know a lot of these things. But I would say I did a bunch of local New York shows, like New York at Night. There was a show, and I did a lot of. There was a Boston show. Mike McDonald, the great Mike McDonald, the comedian who I went to college with, who had, was really great to comics and put all of us on television. He had a cable show, and we got some of our first stand-up experiences through our good friend and my college buddy, Mike McDonald. So, I did a lot of television stuff, but the Letterman show was my first network. It was, Star Search was network. So, but it was my big major television debut, and I was excited about that.
Was that the one which one do you think made you the most? Were you more nervous for your first Letterman or when you showed up for Star Search the first time?
I never thought of that. Star Search I was just, I don't know. I was kind of nervous for Star Search. You only get to go for 2 minutes, and I went out there and I thought I did well and I didn't win. But I had fun and it was really cool. The Letterman show, it wasn't that I was nervous. I worked so hard on the set that I was ready to go. And then I got bumped because I forgot
Ooh.
why. They had the director of Men in Black, who's a really brilliant guy, and his name just slipped my mind. I can picture him. And he was so funny that they kept him for an extra segment. They bumped the comedian. I worked there, so yeah, but I just started working there that year. So it wasn't like, they were going to, because I was in the running to do the show as a guest before I started working there. I was getting really close. And then when I started working there as the warm up, they were going to give me a spot. And luckily I had a very good first spot, and then they let me do a bunch. But I was it's not, I'm on that stage every night, and the band is on my right, and they're my friends that I hang out with. And Letterman, who was very supportive, was on my left, and I knew that stage so well that it wasn't so much nervous.
That was your home.
Yeah. The adrenaline was really big the night I did Letterman the first time. The adrenaline, I talked a little too fast. And Joan Rivers actually told me to slow it down, and I did slow it down some. But it was, yeah, it's a hard question to ask, to go back. It's fun to go back and to think of the mood I was in. Star Search, I was sort of out of my element. I was flown to LA. I didn't really know. I knew like two people out there. Monica Piper, who was a great comedian, let me stay on her couch, and it was nice. It was cool. It was October of '86, around the time the Mets were going into the World Series.
Everybody was talking about Star Search.
Yeah,
that show was on.
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember
Star Search. Everybody. Yeah.
There's an interesting moment because Ed McMahon's on your right, and you're doing your thing, and when they announce your numbers, you got to look forward, because they put the numbers underneath when you're doing it. But at the show and the theater, the numbers were on the board just above and to the right of Ed McMahon. So I thought I did really, really well. And when they said Eddie Brill, and it was like 3 1/4 stars or whatever it was, I looked to my right, because it was like, what? I thought I knocked that out of the park. And I looked to the right, and it looked like I was going, Ed McMahon, what the fuck? Didn't you see what I did? That's what it looked like. But I was looking at the scoreboard in sort of I was disillusioned because I thought I did better. But, in retrospect, it doesn't really matter. I got television out of it, and I went up against my dear friend Sue Kolinsky, who's a brilliant comedian who did very well on the show, and there was nothing bad about it. It was pretty cool.
And I want to ask you this, as I'm curious, because I know that usually when I meet comics, there's always, I like the origin story, because everybody comes, once we get into this fraternity of picking up the microphone and talking to people with a light in our face,
Yeah.
it's like we become, essentially all comics are the equivalent of cousins.
Yeah.
As soon as we walk into the room with other comics, that you understand that person because they took the same vicious beating that first year that you took.
Yes, you're right. That vicious beating we've all been through.
Because everybody. I know that January 8th, 1986, Comedy Works Philadelphia, 126 Chestnut. I was number 16.
Wow.
Killed.
Yeah.
And being 17, stupid, I'm thinking, oh, this is easy.
You're right.
Oh man.
That's what happened to me.
I should have my sitcom.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I went out. The crowd was mostly my friends, and the comics were mostly my friends. It was like Dennis Leary and Stephen Wright and Paula Poundstone, and and friends of mine who were in college with. Steve Ball was this very funny guy, and it's all our friends from school, and all the audience is our friends. So I went out there and did this shitty act, and my friends laughed like I was a king, and I walked out of there 5 feet off the ground and thought, I got this. And then and then the second time,
yeah, exactly.
It was like
that laugh was very familiar. I'll put it to you this way: I'm 5'8", okay, I walked on the stage, 5'8". I came off. I think it was about 7'2". I walked. I
You
walked
and
on
Will
stage the second
Chamberlain.
time. I walked on the stage the second time. Keep in mind, I had built myself up, so I was 7'2" when I walked off. By the time I came back, I was 10'6".
Yeah,
They had built it up in
yeah,
my
right.
mind. I walked on that stage, and I think, I mean, you know what a plank length is?
Plank lymph.
I was, I was the size of an atom.
Oh yeah. Oh
When
right.
I
Yeah.
walked off, I was like, "Oh my god, what the hell?" You know, what did they do in Port? The people that liked me the first time, there was 16 people that loved me. Now these 12 people are looking at me as if to say, "Listen, kid, you know,
Yeah.
and it's
Good
like,
luck.
oh god, you know,
Good luck in
that's like
sales.
that's cute. He said, yeah. You go back, pick up your microscope, punk, and get out of here.
Yeah.
you know, you
Yeah.
know, yeah. You
Yeah.
listen, science boy. You go back
Yeah.
there. Now, but I can't let you go without. I have to find. I got to get your origin story, man. I got to see. I got to find out
Sure.
the soil the tree came from. I have to know.
You know, it's funny that
Now,
you
when
say
you
that.
just,
I have done a lot of my own podcasts as well, and I have one that
Mhm.
is called OG Talk, which is about the organic grill in New York, and I have like 25 to 30 episodes of that. But the original podcast I did was called The Break with Eddie Brill, and there's only 11 episodes because I ended up doing something else and I had to stop. But it was exactly this kind of question because I was always curious how people started in their origin story. You know, was your parents funny? Was your grandparents funny? Were your brothers funny? Did people think, and I talked to,
Mhm.
Gaffigan and Mario Cantone and Susie Essman and on and on. There's 11 of them. So it's something that, that I was very curious of. For me, in my house, my parents were very young. They were 18 when they got married. They were like 20 when I was born. And they loved comedy, and and my mom was the funniest person on the planet. She was funny until the day she passed, and she only passed a couple of years ago. And she was my best friend and hilarious, and loved my comedy and supported me the whole way. But she was really loved laughing and watching comedians. And I remember my sister and I were being babysat in this hotel we were visiting, and my mom and dad had come from seeing Buddy Hackett, and they were walking in the room laughing and hugging like they were so in love, because laughter does that to people. When you laugh together,
Yes,
you
indeed.
love together. And I never forgot how happy my mom looked. And and here's the interesting part about that is they had to watch the show. The show was over. They had to pay the bill, come up through the lobby, go up the elevators, and they were still laughing at the show, like laughing. And I always wanted to make my mom laugh like that, because she was so beautiful always anyway, but she was so beautiful to me to watch her laugh, and to be able to make her laugh was a gift, because all of us were funny in our house, sarcastic, because of her. She was genuinely a hilarious person, and not on purpose. I'm Everyone in my family's funny. I'm the only one who got paid for it. But
Yeah.
that's what sort of got me. And then of course they let me watch the comics on The Tonight Show, and I remember seeing Carlin, and that really, because I was very much a Carlin type of human before I ever heard of George Carlin. Because I would take index cards and I would do a lot of wordplay. Like I remember early, I was like a little boy, with index cards, and I would draw a picture of a salt shaker and a knife, and I'd like assault with a deadly weapon, and then, I would, and I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then, I would like, there was a guy running, and then there was a cross, running as well. And I'm like running across, and I thought, oh, I'm a genius. And then I changed like I'd make names like Isabel ringing, like I was always
Yeah.
wordplay with me that I loved. And that's why when I saw people who were really great with the language, like the Brits and like Carlin and those kind of people, they made me laugh the most. And that's when I realized that's who I am. I found someone who does who loves the words, and the words dance in their heads. One of the coolest things in my life, and I've had a pretty incredible life. I'm very blessed. And I very rarely say blessed. That's how blessed I am in this scenario, is that I have met some of my biggest heroes and have become friends with a lot of them, including Carlin. Meeting Pryor, I wasn't friends with him, but all the people along the way. But I know Dick Cavett really well, and he's an amazing human being, and he's a wordsmith, and his parents were English teachers. His father was an English teacher, and we're like, 7 years old when we hang out together. We laugh like children who are just frolicking and sitting in the schoolyard having fun. And the fact that he is the kind of comic and kind of interviewer and humanitarian and hip, cool guy. He had Hendrix on before anybody else, and he had Sly and the Family Stone, and it's, like all the other talk shows, they'd put the band on last. He'd open with the band, with Janis Joplin or whoever. He was very hip. So the fact that he's a guy who appreciates the wordplay and that kind of stuff, that is the biggest thrill of my life, is the fact that I was able to meet some of these people and have them appreciate what I did. I have a million Carlin stories, 3, especially, I'm not going to go into them, but where Carlin told other people how much he liked what I did. And, that's all I need. That's, if I never did comedy again, I'd be sad, but at least I know that the people I respected thought I was funny, thought I was talented.
The only difference between you and me is I was just listen, George, you're not leaving. I want you to stand right here. Where are you going? I'm gonna get my micro cassette so you can repeat that, so I can prove you said it.
Yes. Oh my God, I wish. I have a voicemail from him. His girlfriend Sally is an amazing writer, a very funny human being. They were together 10 years. He was married, and then she passed from cancer. And then he met Sally, and he was completely in love. And he called me up and left a voicemail saying, first he called me to say, and I spoke to him. He said, "I'd like you to teach my girlfriend to do stand-up." And I was like, "What? You're George Carlin?" And he said, "Yeah, but she's not going to listen to me." Which was very interesting. And he said, "I heard you were really the best at this, and I like your comedy. Will you do it?" So I says, "Yeah, sure." And so one day he left a message on my machine. I'd spoke to him before, and he said, "Hey, Eddie, it's George. Just want to let you know that we're going to be by, blah, blah, blah." And I have that message saved, of course, because, even if he said, "Eddie, it's George Carlin, fuck you," I would be like, "Oh, I love you."
Yeah, I might have asked him to say that on purpose.
Yeah. Oh, right, that would have been better. Yeah,
because essentially what you just described is like, Eddie, yeah, this is Michael Jordan. I was wondering, could you give my son some basketball tips?
Right.
You're Michael Jordan.
Yes.
Last time I checked, maybe you should do that.
Right.
I appreciate it. But I mean. And if you compare me to everybody else, I take that. But you're Michael Jordan. I mean, I don't. But that's the funny thing.
But he was right. He was like, he said, he said, Mike, she's not going to listen to me. So, at least in his mind, you think that, you want someone outside of you. It's and of course I was thrilled to give it a shot, and we worked at it. But they lived in LA, and we really didn't get to see each other much, but Sally and I have stayed friends all these years. And in fact, she gave me a photo that, of the last picture. He took a selfie and sent it to her, and she shared it with me. I promised I would never share it with anyone or make it public, but I have this great photo of George's very last photo, and I'm so, again, there's that blessed word that I got. It's really cool. I'm very happy that I've had this. I made mistakes. I've had, people come at me for reasons that, I don't understand why people can be so mean or so spiteful or vengeful. But 98% of my experiences in this life have been amazing and beautiful. And I get to do what I love for a living, and I miss stand up. And I'm getting, 2 weeks from now, I'm doing a outdoor gig in California. But I really love stand-up, and I'm so thankful that I get to do what I love for a living. I really am.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And before we close up, I want to find out. I got to ask you about New York, because I haven't
Yeah.
been there in a while, and I saw like every time I obviously with the pandemic, I have this. Oh God, this is gonna make me like an idiot. But okay,
It's okay.
I
I'll
have
back
this
you up.
habit of I go on the internet, in any city that I live in, I look for dash cam videos of people
Mm,
driving through the so I can see what it looks like now.
cool.
Um, I, yeah, I did it when I lived in LA. I saw a dash cam. Somebody drove through my old neighborhood in Hollywood, because I lived on Orchid Avenue, which is right around the corner from where they from the Chinese theater,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
across
yeah.
the street
Right.
from. So my apartment is still there. They ripped down everything and literally stopped at the apartment I used to live in.
Mm,
And so I saw of somebody doing a dash cam drive right through Manhattan. And the last time I was in New York was 2004. Okay, the last time I was in New York for comedy was
mhm.
2004. I should say that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because after that, I was doing all this other stuff and trying, and all this other kind of things I was working on. But and then I looked at it and I'm going, you know, because I have a picture imprinted in my mind of what my New York looks like, and it was like looking at a friend that was sick because there was nobody there. It was just empty. Like I was waiting for Will Smith to walk out with a dog and a gun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, but
So
I saw it differently because when it first happened, the sky started clearing up. The streets weren't packed. The birds were singing, and it was not just birds singing, it was a ton of birds. New York had become, Mother Nature had come through the New York and said, look, you guys have been very, very bad. Now go to your room, and I'm going to clean up around here. You know what I mean? So we were stuck in our apartments while she was outdoors cleaning up the mess and resetting the button. So I would
mhm,
sit on my stoop with my mask, and I'd hear the birds chirping, and the skies were clear, and it was so beautiful outside, and there were no
mhm,
cars on the streets, and it was really nice and weird. And and when it's and all of these shots you see of New York, and it's like this danger pit. It's not a danger pit. They go, oh, be careful,
mhm,
there's all of these rioting and stuff, and it was like 2 blocks of rioting in
mhm,
downtown by City Hall. It's like in Seattle, they're saying, there's all this rioting, and it's like 2 blocks of rioting, and it's just the cameras only
mhm,
show those 2 blocks. So New York, the crime was really down to practically nothing, but it's less crime
mhm,
now than when Giuliani was mayor. So New York's not there's more murder, weirdly enough, in the whole New York, which is the 8 million people in all the suburbs. And I think people are
mhm,
desperate, and people are hungry, and people are scared. And I think that brings out the worst in people. So instead of calming people who are living in hell and fear, if it's like fighting someone who's down. It's like being in a war. You don't
mhm,
win in a war. People die. People are,
mhm,
that you leave a lot of bad feelings. But if you come through in a compassionate way when people are down, there would be less crime. There would be less rioting. If when you know, you know, Colin Kaepernick, had a peaceful protest, the people got together and say, well, let's talk about this and let's find the compassion
mhm,
here. There wouldn't be any of this shit that's going on right now. I mean, there's always going to be crime, but New York is the crime in New York is so far less than when it used to be. Even when Giuliani made it a little bit better, it's still less crime in New York than it is now. It's still a vibrant city. People are eating outdoors now. You can't go inside. So the streets are lit up and packed with people walking up and down the streets. And there's a fear, and I'm a lot more careful. I don't carry a lot of
mhm,
money with me, but enough that if I was robbed, that it would be like, oh, well, here's $40, at least I got something. You know what I mean?
mhm,
So New York is not, don't believe people. I'll give you an example. I was in Hawaii 2 years ago doing an incredible series of gigs on the Big Island, The night I got there, the next day, the volcano erupted, and it was a pretty big deal. It was in the southeastern part of the Big Island. I was 20 miles north. I didn't see it or feel it. There was an earthquake, and that I felt from it. But I ended up working like crazy. I ended up working a ton, and no one was freaking out, and everyone was enjoying life, and everyone helped. Like, we were going to put on a show for the people who were displaced because of the volcano, and everyone got together and took care of the people who were hurting. But on the news, they made it sound like, run for your lives. And people were calling me up, Eddie, get home, get on a plane. I go, what are you talking about? I'm having the time of my life. It's so beautiful here, and the camaraderie among the people who are getting through this sort of tough time together is making it even more beautiful. So it's a really long way to tell you, New York's okay. We're going to be fine. We're always fine. We're fine. 9/11, we're fine after that. A friend of mine said, you know what happened after the pandemic of 1918? It was the roaring 20s.
Exactly.
So we're going to be fine. It's not going to be easy, and there's going to be more crime and more desperation because we don't have leaders who know how to lead with compassion. So instead, there's going to be desperation and crime. But because, all we can do is tell jokes and make people laugh and make them forget their problems every once in a while.
Yeah, I'm glad you said, because like as I said earlier in the show, I said comics are like cousins, but to me, New York is like an old friend that I'd never stopped loving.
That's nice.
And so it's like I just want. Now, granted, I'm from Philadelphia, so I hate all these sports teams. But the people,
of course. If you like the sports teams, I would think you're out of your mind. I would have hung up on you a long time ago. It's like, what kind of a Philadelphian person are you? How can you not? No,
I got news for you. I'm a big Eddie Brill fan. That's the truth. Okay, well, I told you that already. Nice. That's the truth. But if you say hi, I'm glad to be on the show. Yeah, I'm a big Yankees fan. I probably would have hung up on you.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So I'm not that big of a fan, buddy. Everything I said good about you, I take it all back.
Right, I understand. And I'm a New Yorker, and I love New York, and I root for the New York teams. Like, I'm a New York Ranger fan. I'm a huge hockey fanatic, and we hate the Islanders. There are arch rivals, almost as much as the Devils. We hate the Islanders. My father loved the Islanders. I love the Rangers. But because I'm in New York, and the Islanders are now in the playoffs, they might be gone by tomorrow. We're recording this before they do Game 6. They might be gone, but I'm rooting for them. My brother, who's such a Ranger fan like me, is like, "Are you out of your mind? Fuck the Islanders. I'm rooting for, I want Tampa Bay." I go, "What do you like about Tampa Bay? They're not the Islanders, Like, okay, I got you.
I got this. When you mentioned the Devils right now, I almost walked out there and I almost had to gargle and spit out in the sink. I had this bad taste in my mouth.
I was hired by the Flyers. The Flyers, I got a call they called the Jon Stewart show way back when, and they were looking for John to come in and do, the Flyers were playing the Devils in a playoff series, and the Devils had taken the first 2 or something like that. And they wanted John to come and do some stand-up for them, as a surprise to them. And John, I guess, recommended me, or someone at the show recommended me, and I got to do the party for the Flyers. And I had carte blanche with even though, I'm a Ranger fan, I didn't say it at the thing, but I was able to, then the Flyers did well after my little comedy performance. So I kind of felt responsible for their success, and, screw the Devils. And weirdly enough, my son, I come from a family where my father was an Islander fan, I'm a Ranger fan, and my son's a Devils fan. So, it's brutal. I hear you.
Now, if you tell me he's a Cowboys fan, I'm going to have to apologize. I'm going to have to beat your son up.
Yeah. We all in unison hate the Cowboys. We'd like to see them.
Thank you very much. Oh, wait a minute. I have to say I just want to say one more thing, because my second biggest audience is Texas. Listen, once again, it's just the team.
Just the team. Only the team. I've had some of
You
the best
guys are
shows of my
incredible
life
because
in Texas. So
it's
yes.
like I have to make sure that I kiss up to California, New York, Texas, and Pennsylvania because that's my top 4 states. So listen,
Yeah.
all 4 of you states are, and that you're incredible. And I just wanted to point that out. I had to. Sorry,
Okay.
I had to do that.
Yeah, I understand. I hear you knocking. And I'm not kidding about
Yeah.
Philadelphia. I love Philly as a city. I think it's has a great energy. It's palpable. It's a great music scene. There's incredible restaurants. I love the history, and so whenever I go to Philly, I have a good feeling. And like I said, I have a ton of friends there, and it's just such a great place. But I'm a New Yorker, and I'm it's the motherland for me, and that's what. I was happy to be here on 9/11, not happy about 9/11, but happy to be here. I was supposed to fly that morning to Los Angeles. Happy to be here because it's my city. And it's like you're the captain of the ship and you go down with the ship. I love New York City with all my heart. So I'm glad that I live here and I'm glad that I've been here for most of my life.
Yes, indeed. Mr. Brill, it's been a thrill. I want to thank you, man, because I've been wanting to get you on this show for a while.
You just had to ask.
Like I said, yeah. See, no one told me that.
Well, good.
I'm going to ask and see if he'll do it. And yeah, so I appreciate it. This is going to be coming out. This episode is going to come out tomorrow.
Okay.
So
and you'll
if you
send
have
it to
anything
me and
that
I'll share it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, if you have anything, and the reason I told you it's coming out tomorrow because I don't do a lot of long delays between the recording and I edit and then I put it out because I like to be able to when I have somebody on if they have gigs or something like that and they want to promote a gig or something like that they can do it on the episode and then have it be active. So
I have
even
podcasts.
though it's pandemic hard too,
I have podcasts, the OG Talk, OG for Organic Grill, and I interviewed, Colin Quinn and Artie Lang, and then John Joseph of the Crow Mag, saying rock and rollers, news anchor people, politicians, and it's all in a healthy food environment. And then I have The Break with Eddie Brill, which is 11 interviews with some of the greatest comics of all time about how they started. And my first regular gig, I have, it's going to be the first weekend of October at the Alameda Comedy Club. It's a brand new club. I helped the guy design the place. I'm his consultant. We were going to open April 1st. I was going to be on the very first show, April 1st. Now I'm on the very first show. They open the first week of October. And I'm also teaching a comedy workshop there. You can't teach comedy, but you could workshop it. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years, all over 25 years around the world. And I'm doing one of those, almost filled up. But if you want to, just contact Patrick at alamedacomedy.com. And if you're in that area, and come say hello. And hopefully I'll see you inside a comedy club. And you and I will have to grab a bite to eat the next time you're coming this way or I come your way.
Absolutely. And thank you once again for doing this podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. And
I look forward to meeting you in person, my man.
Yeah, and you have my regular phone number, don't you? I don't know if you do. If you don't, we'll text it to each other. We'll get it. We'll send it to each other, and then
we'll do that on Messenger. I don't think you want to get tons of.
Yeah, no, I know better. I know better. I know. You know what's funny? When I had a landline, I used to have my number was listed, and no one called it because they would think, yeah, why would he list that number? So it worked, and I got like 3 calls in my life from people going, man, we were in the 3rd grade together. I was like, oh my God, Scott Levine, So it was like I was so glad that I left my number listed because there was a couple of friends of mine from childhood that had looked for me in the book and got me. But nowadays I'm okay. You can find me on the internet. You can find me and contact me if you liked or hated anything I said. So.
This is well, this audience loves you. I know that much because I know this audience.
Very cool. Yeah.
after all these. Oh my good. Thank you, my good sir. I appreciate you for coming on.
Same here. Have a beautiful night, and we'll talk again soon.
Hey, take care. Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.
All right, everybody. Now, did I tell you or did I tell you? Did you love that or what? That was a lot of fun. I'm glad I got an opportunity to have Eddie on the show. And Eddie, I know you're listening to this. Once again, thank you for coming on. And more importantly than anything else, I want to thank all of you for listening. And I want to thank all of you for constantly telling your friends about the show and having new audiences pile in on a regular basis. Much love to all of you. And I will talk to you next time. Take care.